An unregulated data breach demonstrating the cybersecurity faults of major U.S. energy companies, a first-of-its-kind gun violence study, a misuse of information requests from public officials, plus an investigation into a national political party playing an unprecedented role in primary elections. I'm Martin Rather. This is The Underreported. Throughout this spring and summer, dozens of primary races will set the field for the highly anticipated 2018 midterms. Historically, primary races are considered local races, with national groups stepping in only after the fields have been set for the general election. But not this year. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee raised over $100 million in 2017. As the name implies, the DCCC has a mission to help elect Democrats to Congress. The Republicans have their group, the National Republican Campaign Committee, which does the same for Republicans. However, the DCCC is now doing something highly controversial, with the potential for control of the House squarely in the balance, inserting themselves in open primary races. Before this election cycle, a national campaign arm involving themselves in a race was highly unusual. When done, it was to protect an incumbent. By our count, this year the DCCC has become involved in 10 or more open races, meaning that in these races there is no Democratic incumbent in the field, and instead these are districts that the Democrats feel they must win in November in order to take back the House. So, the DCCC is putting their thumb on the scale in these races, and to mixed results. In New York's 24th Congressional District, the DCCC effectively recruited a candidate who had already passed on running in the race and is attempting to push out a more progressive candidate. Something similar is happening in Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District, except that the DCCC was also accused of racial bias by attempting to prevent the nomination of an African-American candidate. The headline in the Washington Post pretty much says it all when they noted that race while also discussing Texas' 7th Congressional District. Democratic group faces backlash after intervening in crowded House primaries. You may remember that on this program, we noted the importance of Texas' 7th Congressional District in our February 27th episode. We ran an interview with Alex Triantafyllis, who had raised the most money of any House challenger in Texas and was running for Texas' 7th Congressional District. Part of that interview, which we did not air at the time, was his opinion on the DCCC's involvement in that race. At the time, they had just released opposition research on one of his opponents, Laura Moser. Here's what Triantafyllis had to say.
The DCCC became involved in this race with Laura Moser. How do you feel about their involvement this week?
I feel like D.C. and every other city in this country should stay out of this race and let voters decide. Let Texas 7 voters decide who they think will be the best representative for Texas 7 and the best nominee to go up against and finally send John Culberson into retirement. So I think we've been focused on running a positive and vision-focused campaign on what we can do for this community and making sure that we're communicating with as much voters as possible. And I think the voters should decide who they think is the best candidate.
When you first heard the news that the DCCC was involved this week in sort of an atypical set of circumstances, what was your reaction?
Well, I'm still new to a lot of this, so frankly I was confused and just trying to figure out what's going on and what does this mean and how can we stay focused on what we're trying to do and how can we keep our blinders on, and I hope all the other candidates are able to do the same.
But that race, more than any, also shows the flip side of the DCCC's involvement. That was the rare instance in which their involvement backfired, because Moser used the opportunity to fight back against the DCCC in the local press and ended up making the primary runoff, which will be held on May 22nd. This can all make someone reconsider the old Tip O'Neill adage, all politics is local. And on the Senate side, the Republicans are discussing doing something similar in the West Virginia race by taking on Don Blankenship, with a secret generic super PAC already airing ads against him. Regardless of one's opinion on the DCCC becoming involved in a race, and even the extent of their success in earning nominations for their preferred candidates, it's important to note that this involvement is unprecedented. Open primary elections are no longer decided solely by local volunteers and activists. They're national races now. And on to our national correspondents. A hack in the energy sector. Cameron Kaufman from Yale University has more.
Customers with some of the largest power companies in the country received a report just a couple weeks ago that the computer systems that they use to coordinate their power needs and to do things such as pay bills or transact with the company have been hacked. 7 of the largest power companies in the United States acknowledging that their third-party communication systems that they use to interface with customers have been compromised by hackers. Reportedly, the hacks have had no effect on the supply and distribution of gas to homes throughout the United States, but nonetheless, they have caused problems, such as customer service billing delays. Now, the companies actually did not have to report the hacks to the Transportation Security Administration, the agency that regulates them, because the hacks only affected computer systems and not the pipelines themselves or the energy within them. Nonetheless, the companies quickly went ahead and reported to the TSA and to their customers, demonstrating their strong concern. So, while the hack had very little tangible impact other than some customer service problems, it still demonstrates that there is a vulnerability to the cybersecurity of U.S. energy infrastructure. In fact, Secretary of Energy Rick Perry announced just a couple months ago that he'd be creating a $96 million program that would be used to beef up the cybersecurity of U.S. energy. Now, it remains to be seen whether or not this program will have its intended effects, but as of now, this is an issue that is high in the minds of both legislators and customers of power companies across the country. Coming to you here from New Haven, Connecticut, I'm Cameron Kaufman, the Underreported.
Kaiser Permanente will fund a study about gun violence after a 1996 bill halted funding for research on this topic. Our correspondent Olivia Leveda from California brings us the story.
In the wake of a steady push for gun reform from mass shooting survivors and retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods and Walmart, the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system plans to invest $2 million into a study on gun violence. A mass shooting is defined as a single shooting event which kills or injures 4 or more people. And as of April 9th, 2018, the Gun Violence Archive reports there has been at least 63 mass shootings in the U.S. this year. In fact, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, says on average 96 Americans are killed by firearm each day. Those who push for more research on gun violence blame the Dickey Amendment for the underfunding of gun violence safety and prevention research. The amendment, which was included in a 1996 spending bill, says none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the CDC may be used to advocate or promote gun control. The bill put an end to the $2.6 million annual budget the CDC received for gun violence research. According to the Washington Post, Kaiser Permanente officials say they will use the initial $2 million to identify what new studies and data would help most and what interventions doctors and hospitals could adopt to reduce gun deaths and injury. From California, Olivia Leveda, The Underreported.
Recently, a government watchdog released the findings of an investigation into how the Department of Justice disciplines bureaucratic officials who misuse public records requests. Vaughn Golden has more from Washington.
Returned to Washington last week. The headlines have been dominated across the board. One story that slipped majorly under the radar is coming out of the Government Accountability Office, a government watchdog. The report detailed information on the Freedom of Information Act request, a major government accountability tool that allows the public to request government documents from any government agency. Under the Freedom of Information Act, the Department of Justice, Office of the Special Counsel, is allowed to initiate proceedings, legal proceedings, against any government employee that is found to have withheld documents from the public in regards to the Freedom of Information Act. Now, the Government Accountability Office report looked into how many of those proceedings have taken place over the last 8 years. They found that only 3 cases were recommended by the DOJ to the Office of the Special Counsel, and none of those were eventually taken up, and no legal proceedings have been taken under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, this is a pretty minutia kind of tool within the federal bureaucracy. However, it is major as far as government transparency goes, and to see what the Department of Justice has been doing to prosecute offenders under the Freedom of Information law, again, a major piece of government transparency. From Washington, I'm Vaughn Golden, The Underreported.
We now end by looking back and then looking forward. This week in history, the Ford Mustang was first debuted at the 1964 World's Fair in New York. Presented as a 2-seat mid-engine sports car, the working man's Thunderbird was based off a World War II fighter plane of the same name. Along with demonstrations at the fair, the car was shown across the country to widespread sales success. The main appeal of the Mustang at the time was its design and starting price of only $2,300. To date, over 9 million units have been sold and are still being produced to this day, even after multiple redesigns and evolutions. And looking forward, General Electric stocks are expected to make a rise after their first quarter earnings report on Friday. Shares in GE have fallen nearly 50% within the last year, resulting in company-wide shakeups, including a series of C-suite changes and a dividend cut last November. And that's the Underreported for this week. If you have stories that you believe are underreported, please comment below, and we'll do our best to get back to you. For the Underreported, I'm Martin Rather. Have a great week.